For those of you who can't read, this is Mitchell Salfeld. He's the second of 6 senior thesis presenters for this year. Same rules as before. Meaningful experiences, a duly inspired account of personal growth.
Let's see. All right, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. This is a pretty cool thing for me. I've come to talk about meaningful experiences. And as a result, if my experience talking up here is not meaningful, then I have failed. And also, if your experience is not meaningful, it's probably your fault. And I'll get into that. I'll get into why. My view on meaningful experience is not one where it's you get the meaning just from somebody giving you an idea. Just because you have a certain belief does not mean that you have a meaningful life. I can't explain living up here in such a way as to make you go home feeling, with a warm heart, I have a meaningful life now because of this speech. My view is more about the work necessary to achieve a meaningful life. Meaningful experiences in general are things that are progressed towards, and also it's not something that once you achieve it, you have it. It's something that must be continually achieved throughout everyday experiences. My paper starts with distinguishing between two main kinds of experiencing. The aesthetic was introduced by the philosopher John Dewey. Different ways of, in my speech I might refer to it different ways, as an integral experience or consummatory or an experience. And then the second is, I kind of coined that term. It's not very, not very great. It's just the everyday experience, or the non-aesthetic, the common or the usual. First is I'll explain the aesthetic experiences. These are seen as separate from the usual stream of experiences. There's something about them that makes them stand out. I remember in high school when I went with a friend of mine in his truck to race another car. And as much as my mom probably doesn't like hearing that, it was an experience for me. My heart was rushing. We were going, 90, 95, but it was an overall experience. It stood out from the experiences that were going on in the day beforehand. These experiences come to a fulfillment. They're consummations. They're stories. They're dramas. They move from a beginning to an end. There's something about the end that sort of makes it stand out as something being beyond other experiences. They have emotional content. You care about what's going on in these experiences. You're with good friends. You're having a lot of fun. You're enjoying what's going on. And it seems that these kinds of experiences, these aesthetic, these integral ones, are the ones worth having, or worth striving for, because these are the ones that seem to make life meaningful in general. However, there is also a different kind of experiencing, and that's what I call the everyday experiencing. And these lack some attribute which makes them non-aesthetic. Just like the aesthetic, the story comes to a close. Well, maybe the everyday, it doesn't come to a close. It doesn't have emotional content. You're tired. You're being lazy. Something about it makes it non-aesthetic. And these experiences seem to make up a significant amount of life. Because, we go to class every day trying to figure out certain things. But how can they be meaningful? Well, the answer that I'm going to put forward is that they account for the background work that allows an experience to occur. They supply the connections that an experience needs in order to occur. How the two kinds interact. Well, the aesthetic experience provides meaning to connections through emotional content. So a certain paper that you wrote, maybe a senior thesis, it was an experience for you. You presented it, and it made a lot of sense, and it was important to you. This ascribes meaning to the process of how the paper came about. We see how important it is to write in a certain way that connects to other people, how to speak in a certain way that connects to other people. The everyday experience supplies the connections by which the aesthetic can give meaning. This is sort of the gathering of material for the aesthetic experiences. Think of a student going to class every day. They go to class and maybe it's not very exciting. They just work through the problems just that the professor gives them, and they do what's necessary to get by in the day. However, one day a class comes up where there's a problem that's very significant to them, and they're able to take part in this class discussion and really put forward answers that matter. This is because of the everyday experiences. They went to class, they put in their work, and they took the notes, and because of this, they sort of have ammunition for their aesthetic experience to occur. If the student just went to class and played on their BlackBerry the whole class, well then it would be highly unlikely that they'd ever have the tools necessary to take part in that discussion later, in which an aesthetic experience could have occurred. So the two work together, and there's a progression that happens towards more meaningful experiences. The two, you're constantly moving back and forth between the two. So, to take an example from my life in track practice, I go to track practice to work out certain technical issues that to throw better or perform better. And I go to a track meet in an attempt to perform my greatest that I can. Maybe this results in an aesthetic experience, maybe it doesn't. But if it does, I still go back the next week to practice, ready to move forward, ready to achieve something even more. And something like that in school, you go to classes every day, and then you come to the end of the class, and maybe the final matters to you. But the next semester, you go back ready to learn more, to expand yourself even further. The everyday, according to this process, will gradually become more meaningful. How is this? It's because when you see the meaning of each thing in the everyday experience, so going to class, you see how paying attention pays off. You see how taking notes pays off. The next time, after the aesthetic experience, the next time you come to class, this time you'll be a little more ready. You'll understand just how things work together, just how important it is that you take notes, just how much more meaning can be gained, and how much more knowledge you can get from the everyday experience. Because of this, the deeper everyday experiences allow for deeper aesthetic experiences. Since the everyday is sort of the gathering of background information or background knowledge or the connections that you need, if these everyday experiences are deeper, well then this allows for an aesthetic experience later on, which is extremely important to you. It counts for a lot of different areas in your life coming together to make a whole meaningful life. And thus, the overall meaning in all the experiences is enriched. It's improved. But this needs a direction. I just described the different kinds of experiences, but now we need a quality of experience. We just can't go out and experience any old thing and expect it to result in an aesthetic experience. The direction I use Dewey's conception of education. Dewey's conception of education is a lot different from the usual usage of education. It's something that is beyond school. I mean, he describes it as a continual reconstruction of experience or of your perspective in such a way as to help you guide your further experience. It's a double part of that. You gain meaning through education. Meaning is about understanding significance, something's place in the world. So you gain the ability to see connections. You become aware of the world that's going on around you. So a person who learns to drive, who does not understand the workings of the car, somebody teaches them about what's going on in the car. Well, the next time they drive, their experience is enhanced. They understand exactly what's going on. They understand exactly how the inner workings of the vehicle are allowing for them to move. But then education also enhances a person's ability to conduct themselves in further experience. It should not only make you aware of what's going on, it should make you a better problem solver as well. It should make you be able to handle if the car breaks down. You should be able to understand why it's breaking down and maybe fix it and then continue driving. Education, though, has its own standard. And this is the standard of growth. Growth as the direction. There is no end to education except further education or continual growth. What this means is that the end of an experience in itself should be what you strive for. You shouldn't think of certain experiences as merely means for other experiences. So going to class, if you think of it as merely a means for getting a good grade, well then going to class will be boring for you. It'll be drudgery. It'll be lackluster. Because you're merely thinking of it as something to get me this better thing in the future. And your mind is only focused on this better thing in the future. Growth is about enriching or bettering our lives. It should make our lives better. We're not growing unless somehow we have a tool to make our life better. And what is a life well lived? A life well lived is one which is good as understood by one who has full knowledge of its meaning. This is a very tricky passage here. But what this means is that the person who is living the life understands it as a life well lived because they've taken sort of responsibility for their own life. They understand what's going on. They're aware of what's going on in their own life. And so it's understood by the person who has full knowledge of its meaning. They understand everything's significance within their own life. And then also, a life well lived is a harmonious whole. It's connected to a lot of different things. So a person is a social being as much as they like to study, I don't know, music or something. They need to understand that there are more elements to your life than maybe what you initially perceive. And what this leads me to is the idea of growth and openness in general. So growth enriches experience through expansion of horizons. It's sort of opening yourself up to the world, becoming aware of more connections within experience. And this openness must exist in all areas. Now, this openness does not necessarily mean letting things just affect you, just letting things work on you. It's an ability to take something in a courageous way and reflect on it in an honest way. So you do not just ignore what somebody says because you're afraid of maybe it'll come into conflict with your own belief. You let them answer or let them say something, and you reflect on it in a wholesome, honest way to really give them a chance to change your view. There are dangers of closing oneself off to certain things. In my paper, I bring up the movie Goodfellas, the organized crime mob hierarchy, and throughout the movie, you see that the family stays within the family. They only hang out with people in their sort of club. And what eventually happens is that they sort of close themselves off to each other. And since they're closing themselves off from one another, their relationships to one another become about manipulation. They become about just using the person for some greater thing that's their own goal. And what happens is that the relationships with these other people are basically ruined. They're very shallow. They quickly fall apart. So going back to experience with this direction of growth, the problem is, how can we constantly be moving towards growth in our experiences? Well, we do this by establishing habits. And because of our energy needs, we can't constantly be trying to expand in all the areas. We can't be constantly be trying to get to know every single person out there perfectly, getting to know every single subject in school perfectly. I mean, we have to sort of pick and choose. But there are ways in order to enhance our ability to continually growing. And that's through establishing habits. And these habits will attempt to unlock growth. Think of two students going to class. One of them is just sitting there, and maybe he's listening, sometimes daydreaming, while the other is taking notes, taking part of class, joining in on discussion. Halfway through the semester, this has become habit for both of these people. But one of these habits, in such a way, is unlocking their growth. When test time comes around, their experience of the test will completely be different than the person who just merely comes and listens. It'll be a deeper experience for them, where they're able to answer questions in a significant manner. And so the idea is to have habits of remaining open to present situations. Think of a person going to practice every day for their particular sport. If they don't enjoy the practice, I mean, they probably won't last long in the sport. If they don't remain open to the practice as it's sort of its own experience with its own meanings, well, then they probably will quit early, because practice is usually what makes up most of the experience of the sport. So in conclusion, we have a movement back and forth between these two kinds of experiences. And the quality of the experiences must be conducive to growth. So what we see is a person has their everyday experiences initially, and where maybe they're a young person and they're not very meaningful experiences, because they don't know what leads to what's going on. They don't understand the connections. However, they have an aesthetic experience. So let's think of a little kid playing piano. Their parents have to sort of force them to go to lessons first off. But after they have some sort of experience which makes piano meaningful for them, then they're able to understand just how important practice is. And so next time they go, they have sort of an increased vigor. It's more important. Practice is a little more important for them. And this continually moves upward. I mean, it should continually move upward. A very Deweyan idea is that we're either growing, we're either expanding, or we're closing ourselves off. And as organic beings, I mean, I believe that's true. So the idea is to establish habits of growth in everyday experiences. And as you do this, they become more open and are richer, allowing the aesthetic to be even richer. So the child learning how to play the piano, each time they have this aesthetic experience of playing something great and important, it's sort of a step forward for them. And when they come back to the everyday, it's more meaningful. And eventually, the goal of this is to have experiences in which the practice is just as meaningful as everything else, where you see the practice as its own end, and not just for getting to a greater good. And so finally, in conclusion, I mean, I think this idea is an idea that meaningful lives or meaningful experiences are really earned. They're not something that can just be given to us. And it's more about the process, and understanding the process is how we can achieve those meaningful experiences. And so now I'd like to open it up to questioning.
I've got a couple quick, mostly terminological questions. So you've got everyday experiences and aesthetic experiences, and then you've got meaningful experiences, but not all, certainly not all everyday experiences are meaningful experiences, but they can be, and then not all. Is it also true that not all aesthetic experiences are meaningful experiences, but they can be, or aesthetic experiences necessarily?
Well, the three kinds of experiences that you just described are not three on the same level. There's different meanings in experience. So there's different levels of the meanings in the experience. So, and that's dependent on, I mean, how many connections so a child is going to grow no matter what. In the movie, the Goodfellas movie, I think it's Henry Hill is the main character. I mean, you can say early on he's really growing. He's really having these experiences with these people that increases relationships and make him, I mean, seemingly almost a better person at first. But in the long run, you will see that his growth is hindered greatly, taken on a long enough route. So two people can experience in deeper ways, and I sort of equate the deepness with how meaningful it is. So the meaning in an experience is sort of on a gradient. Does that make sense? You think so?
I see your approach and Dewey's to some extent as inherently linear. You're moving from point A to point B, and it's what you're doing along the way that makes point B shadow back as useful. Is that linear? Can a person be on more than one line at one time?
Yes. I mean, I can't remember if I put this in my paper or not, but an important part of this idea is that it's relative to what a person is trying to achieve. So you have relationships with other people, or you have your studying that's going on in school. You can be on different levels. So you could be amazing in school, but maybe you don't know how to relate to people, or you don't know, or you're just mean to people or something. I mean, you could be on different levels according to what you're trying to achieve.
So a meaningful life is one where you are sufficiently on a good enough level in all important aspects, so as the whole life then.
Right. I mean, eventually you will need a base in each of them. I mean, it might be a very arbitrary base, but not every person is going to be an expert in everything. But if you do ignore particular aspects, so if you ignore social relationships completely, well, when you have experiences, they'll just be you. You can argue that they're not going to be that great because you're not going to have any friends there to cheer you on. In the same way, if somebody ignores their health greatly, somewhere down the road, that could come up to hinder an experience later. Yeah.
I want to pick up on the point about the linear and ask you a question. What if I say, well, look, this theory is great for guys like you. You're a big, strong guy, you're smart, you've got a girlfriend, from what I understand. And, yeah, I mean, you're accomplishing all kinds of things, but you know, what if I'm no good at school and I was born sickly? You know, my best friend dies when I'm young. Everything I tried just doesn't seem to be working out. Through no fault of my own. I was trying to meet friends, but I'm a goof in some way. What do you think Dewey would say about that? I mean, is a person like that just sort of out of luck?
Well, a lot of times this idea can be equated with perfectionism. So we think of this idea, and you think, well, the whole idea is that I need to be great. I mean, I need to be excellent in all these different ways. But I largely think that, I mean, it also depends on capability too. And there are things that occur that are of no fault of your own, where that really hinders your capabilities in some areas. I mean, if you're born blind, well then you can't experience, I mean, experience sight. So, but what you can experience can still be meaningful. And in such a way as this, I mean, so that so people who don't have the capability as much as someone else can still be meaningful, because a lot of it has to do with emotional content. It can they still care about what they're doing. So even a mentally retarded person can still care about what they're doing, and in the effect that they, I mean, are able to attain some connections and learn some things, even though it might be minimal compared to us. They can still care about those things that are going on in their lives, and I mean, they can still be having enjoyable experiences overall.
Less meaningful, though?
Less meaningful?
Overall, if I'm sickly and goofy and not very smart?
I don't necessarily think less meaningful. I mean, because they're not really responsible for what happened, for their condition. On the other hand, a person who is completely capable in all areas, but only achieved the level of that the mentally retarded person did, well then I would say that was less meaningful. It assumes sort of achieving your potential. So comparing one person to another person is not quite the same. I don't think you can I mean, if I were to make a graph, I don't think you can equate numbers with saying this is number 3 on the meaningful scale and these people achieved this. It's relative to the person as well.
One of my favorite examples in your paper that you didn't talk about is Bernie Madoff, who you give him as an example of a guy who had a pretty successful project going, and someone might have put him down as a candidate for a fellow who's lived a meaningful life. Now, he made the mistake, though, of getting caught. I'm more interested in the Bernie Madoffs who don't get caught, the people who... Is a meaningful life compatible with crime? Is it compatible with evil? You mentioned goofiness or something. Is it compatible with, I don't know. Here's an example that came up in my philosophy of art class recently. Video games. I mean, people who their meaningful life is carved around, you know, achieving aesthetic experiences through massive online sword-wielding experiences. I mean, one of the problems with life sometimes, maybe I'm seeing this more in middle age now, is that, I mean, one of the nice things about college, all right, is that you do have final exams. And you do have track meets and things like this. I mean, there are these events that you can build up to, and then, you know, and if you do your homework, you can have a, whatever, call it a consummatory experience, whatever you're calling it. Well, these things are hard to achieve. But anyway, at times.
Are you asking 2 different questions?
Use all one. I'm coming to a conclusion. In certain artificial environments, by applying, well, I don't know, fantasy worlds, to take the example of the games, or crime. All right, I'm going to pull off a Ponzi scheme. This will take a lot of work, but I bet I could do this, you know. And then you have to do kind of off-the-wall things, not the usual clean up your room, tend the garden, mow the lawn, take out the garbage. I mean, the stuff that I fill my days with, right? It'd be more like college, you know. So the final exams, I'll make myself my first billion, and no one will know about it or something. Now, I'm interested in the people who don't get caught. As you understand it, you understand these are separable questions. You can take them all lumped together, pull them apart as you go. These include criminals. This includes I don't know what you call them, countercultural, computer nerd folks. This would include. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
All right. Let me sum up.
Yeah, I know.
Meaningful experiences, they sound like a good thing. It's not so clear. It's not so clear.
Well, I think you have.
Having a meaningful experience and be living a lousy life. Do you agree or disagree? To be having a meaningful life and a lousy life.
Wait, say it again.
They'll be self-satisfied. They'll be pleased with themselves, but either socially isolated or hurting thousands of people, you know, with some criminal enterprise. Or how do you connect this with what I guess we call ethics, or a life well lived in all things considered, not just in your own little psychology?
Well, I think that I think you have almost two different questions. The first one being, and it seems like this mold sort of fits school. You go to school for a semester and then you take a test, and then you recharge and go to school for a semester and then take a test. But I think this can be applied beyond school, because either way, going too far in either way can really kind of hinder you from sort of growing as a person. So too much everyday experiences where you're just kind of going and not caring. I mean, it sounds like the factory worker who goes and works in a line of people and just does the same thing over and over again. They don't really care about what they're doing. They're not really solving significant problems, and taking that too far, this person, will not have a meaningful life. And if they do have a meaningful life, it's salvaged from things beyond their work, their relationships with their families, or maybe projects they have going beyond work, things that they do care about and are solving meaningful problems in. On the other hand, too many aesthetic experiences, I believe, can also be a hindrance, especially early on in life. I use the example in my paper of a piano player again, and a young piano player, where they play a song that's initially hard for them, and then they play it for their parents and a crowd of people, and it's a very big experience. But when it comes time harder to try to move forward and play a harder song, they just give up. The child can't take it. They don't want to do the work involved, because this last one was easy, it was fun, but now this is boring again. And so the parents, in an effort to sort of still try to salvage their piano playing, they make them play the same level of songs again and again and again. And each time they have to sort of mold the situation around the child. They yell and cheer and pay people off to cheer. And so it becomes an aesthetic experience for the child. But it's an aesthetic experience for them, not because of the playing. It's because of what's going on around them at the time. And if they were to continue growing, the parents would have eventually tire out and couldn't make it meaningful for them anymore, and they'd probably quit because they figure that they don't want to play any harder songs. And then so the second question, I think, is, how can openness lead to moral, how does the moral element connect to the openness? And this is probably for me right now, the toughest objection to counter. But my answer is that we're not all perfectly good human beings in all areas at all times. We're going to make mistakes. do wrong in certain areas. This view is about continually growing. It's about continually expanding yourself. In the case of the video game players or Bernie Madoff, they're closing themselves off. A video game player could lead a meaningful life, so much as they're not letting it come into conflict with a lot of what's going on in their life. And in the case of Bernie Madoff, I mean, the view is that to pull off a scheme, like a big Ponzi scheme is like he did, it takes manipulation. It takes hiding from people in a certain way. And taken too far, that can, I think that can ruin everything else, because it's connected to everything else. One of the major points of education is that the further back you stand and the more you can see, the more you see how everything is connected to one another, or everything is connected to one another. So you see how your relationships with other people is connected to your business success, or your success in something you like doing. And so I would argue that the moral element there is that sure, we mess up, but the idea is to be continually growing. Keep learning, keep expanding yourself. If you mess up and then realize, oh, I'm messing up, and then just sort of hide that part away, well, eventually, if it's an important part enough, it's going to come back and seep into other ways of living.
As you know, in value theory and ethics, there seem to be two basic positions. One is that values and morality is a subjective experience, the feeling you have, and you're not right or wrong about it, you just feel certain ways. The other one is that there are objective moral truths, or there are value facts, there are right answers and wrong answers. And as I listen to you, you seem to be saying both things, sometimes one, sometimes the other. You say things like, well, it matters what you care about. That seems to be subjective. You say things like, it's relative to what you're trying to achieve. Again, that seems to be subjective. Then you say things like mess up, which implies that there's a right answer that you're not getting it. Or you say you should have these, which is, again, kind of objective claim. Mm-hmm. Or you say it's worth striving for, which suggests that if you don't do it, you're doing something wrong. So which is it? Is there an objective truth to this matter? That there is a right answer to how you should live? Or is it just subjective?
Well, I'll be using a lot of Dewey's ideas on morals for this answer, but I mean, it is subjective. It counts for the person what they care about, but that doesn't mean that so there are no set values, certain things that each person should strive for, but there are things that have evidence in their favor. So honesty has a lot of evidence in its favor, that you should act in an honest way in order to preserve relationships with people. It's not about trying to find something that's set for all times, for all lives, because, and I mean, this is a big point for Dewey, that so many people are different, and also so many people are solving so many different problems. And there's always novel problems that are going to arise. And then also, because of advances in science or things, there's also different ways of solving those problems that arise. So, I mean, the point is that you should not try to set some standard as a fixed end, because there could be a problem that would arise that a standard cannot deal with. And so the idea comes back to, again, the continual growth, continually expanding in such a way as to account for these problems. But there are, like I said, certain ways of living that have evidence in their favor. So they matter to us right now. I mean, so I say that that these things, so you mess up. Well, it's because, I mean, a lot of us assume that slapping somebody across the face in an argument or something is messing up because it ruins our relationship with that person. But, I mean, there could come a time where maybe slapping somebody in the face, maybe they're in they're in a state of panic or something, and you slap them across the face and you say, calm down. I mean, it's a standard, but because that we realize that certain problems can arise that the standard can't help, then we can't really set it as a complete objective standard.
But again, you still seem to be saying both. Like you say, again, that it's relative to the person, but then we should strive to have relationships. Well, again, is that objective or not? What if somebody doesn't care about relationships? What if they don't care about these things? Are you in a position to say they're wrong? Or
Well,
are you just going to say, well, they just happen to have different values than you do?
a large part of this theory is it's a naturalist theory. It's concerned with scientific thought and how science describes our lives. And I mean, a large...
The about science is that it doesn't offer values, right?
Right.
It just describes, it doesn't tell us how to...
Right, and so when I say we should strive for relationships, it's because, I mean, we can see instances where relationships, if we don't have good relationships with other people, it can really destroy us. If a person psychologically was born capable of doing everything without the use of other people, I mean, it seems like a far-fetched example, but really, if they were born that way, well, then it probably wouldn't be a value that they would need to achieve in order to have a meaningful life. Yeah, go ahead.
So, sort of carrying on from that, you say that the problem with the reason Henry Hill and Bernie Madoff don't have meaningful lives is that they lack healthy interaction with other people. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? Specifically, healthy for whom? I mean, healthy for themselves or healthy for other people?
Well, for both, actually. Healthy for themselves in that if you're constantly manipulating somebody, and maybe they find out about it, or maybe they don't have to find out about it. If you're then there's going to be something about the way you're conversing with them on a daily basis. It's not going to be real, and so sometime down the road, when maybe you need them for something, well, maybe they're not there for you because they don't really. You haven't been open enough with them to really make them feel like you care about them.
So how about this? How about the master criminal who essentially who never commits crimes in his own city? So the master criminal who has he has a nice life, a nice apartment in the city, and a family and friends. He goes about his business, and he has all sorts of meaningful social relationships with people he doesn't lie to. And then at night, he puts on his mask and is a supervillain. Mm-hmm. Murders and is an assassin and does all sorts of things. But he hurts all sorts of people mm-hmm. in the interest of his goals. And he's a master criminal. And so he really does amazing feats, hurting all these people. But he doesn't hurt anybody he knows. He just kills strangers. He just mm-hmm. tortures strangers. And he has all these meaningful interactions with. But he has deeply meaningful interactions that are healthy to him and healthy to the people he gives a crap about at home. Mm-hmm. So is that guy having a meaningful life? And if so, why not?
Well, I mean, an answer that Dewey and I would, agree with Dewey on this, is that this example, it'd be very hard to believe that the way they're acting at night is not seeping over into the way they're acting during the day. So the way they interact with people, there's common elements to it, and if they're really acting in a way where they're having meaningful relationships with people during the day, well then it's only because they're hiding themselves. They're hiding what they're doing, and in this way, they'd have to hide who they are from the people they love the most, and this would not make it very meaningful for them. To keep the charade going, they have to tell all the loved ones that they love certain kind of chocolates. It comes up. well, one day a loved one gets them this box of chocolates, and because you love them so much, and inside they're thinking, no, I hate these things. I just had to keep up the charade. Well, it wouldn't be very meaningful for them because they had to lie about it. They had to keep this thing going. And I mean, the idea would be eventually that they probably could not keep this going.
The same idea from a different tack. For a couple of short yes or no's and then a follow-up. The central value of this whole system the openness and growth aspect of it.
Yes.
Is that absolute?
What do you mean?
Is that the whole point of the system, is the openness and growth? Is that something that, as a procedural process, forgetting about the goals for this moment, is that the central and the only way to get where you're going with your process and with your system?
I will say no. Because to keep in line with what I explained to Dr. Miller earlier, to give a complete, full standard is to, I mean, in this instance, would be to counteract exactly what I said earlier. Growth right now, continual growth seems to be the way of expanding ourselves in such a way as to make our lives more meaningful.
But without, you see, the problem I have with a fully subjective system is without some objective backing behind it, there's no measurement to be had. Here you are.
Well,
My essential
well, explain that again.
Without having some objective process. I mean, this seems like a process.
Mm-hmm.
This is something you go through in your life, and a really, really meaningful life will involve mastering this process for whatever scientific reason or whatever, to where you can lead the most meaningful life. But that, to me, seems to say that the process is of itself, at least as regards humanity that's on this earth today, an objective value or truth. And it doesn't matter where the process takes us, as long as being true to ourselves, we work out the process. And so you have a subjective goal set and a subjective set of standards. But the process is the objective bedrock of this whole system. Am I getting that wrong?
Yes, it's not necessarily an objective system. I mean, the view of naturalism, when we try to solve problems, we do it in a scientific manner. We attempt to solve the problem like a scientist. We take what we know and we try to explain certain things. So in the same way, what I'm doing here is trying to take what I know and explaining meaningful experiences and how to achieve these meaningful experiences. And it could easily come later that somebody, I mean, has a better way of doing this, and a better way of doing this. And at that point, I mean, I should not be so concerned with my idea here, my amazing idea, that I should hold on to it so much.
Yeah. But then isn't that objective proof that your process was wrong? And even if science,
Well, not necessarily. I mean,
gets to the point where you affirm this, science is based on mathematics, which is based on a set of premises we just take for granted, because it can't be any other way, an objective truth. My central point here is if this is all subjective, why is it not smoke and mirrors?
well, it's because there's a time and point of living where we have a problem that needs to be solved. And we have tools at our disposal of which to solve it. If we don't act, well, then nothing is gained. So if you're constantly, I mean, just because science can be overturned at some later point does not mean that it's objectively false, because it's solving problems. I mean, somebody would say, well, it's not false. Look, I mean, it helped cure a certain disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's not objectively false. Just because sometime later it might be overturned does not necessarily mean that it's false.
If I,
What?
Can I ask a different question?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to pursue his point, the subjective, objective, this is becoming different. You seem to be depending a lot here on Dewey and explicating Dewey's views. Are your views different than Dewey's in any respect? Or are there ways that you think Dewey's wrong? Can you distinguish Dewey's thought from yours?
Well, I think the large part of my thesis that was not Deweyan was the everyday experience. I think.
So he doesn't have anything comparable to that?
What do you mean comparable? Like
he doesn't have an idea of the everyday experience?
No, I mean.
So that's you, that's your own thought?
Right. He has a view on aesthetic experiences as if these things should be moved towards, and I think he's right about that. But then again, I do not think it's within ability of a person to constantly be having these aesthetic experiences, because if you really try to attain meaningful goals or good goals, well, there's going to be work involved, and it's going to be over a certain amount of time, and there's going to be days where you're tired. There's going to be days where you don't really seem to care about what you're doing. I mean, the same thing happened with my paper, with writing this. In that some days I thought, this is stupid. I don't want to do this anymore. But yeah. So to get back. Yeah. So the everyday was sort of my injection into that to help explain. Help explain the process of moving towards aesthetic experiences or meaningful experiences. I think he had one for.
So, in this view, depending on whether an experience is meaningful or if it's just another everyday experience, differs kind of on the person and what type of experience they've had, right?
Right.
Okay. So, like for one person, the test that they're taking might just be another everyday experience because they never studied, they didn't get into class. But for another, it's like a really meaningful experience. Like, yes, I know this.
Mm-hmm.
But what's keeping these anti-meaningful experiences, like the cat burglar, assassin, murderer person, what's keeping that activity from being a meaningful experience for them? Or lying to their family could be a meaningful experience, or this great Ponzi scheme could be a meaningful experience.
Well, I think there's a different answer for between those examples. The first one, between the two different students. The everyday, the reason for one it's an everyday and for one it's a meaningful aesthetic is because one of them sort of put in the work. Are you assuming that they both put in the work?
No.
Okay, so I get even if both put in the work, maybe that day that student just didn't seem to care. They were worried about something else going on at the time. Maybe a loved one just died or something. So they're more worried about that, and it's hindering them from having this aesthetic experience. Whereas the other person, they also prepared, and they got a good night's sleep, and nothing happened in between the sleep and test time, and they were able to focus completely on this test, which resulted in an aesthetic experience. Can you explain the other two examples again?
I'm just saying, what's keeping one person from experiencing an experience as meaningful? It seems like you're not saying that it's based on the actual experience of what's happening, it's based on the person that's experiencing it. So why couldn't one, like any example given here, be a meaningful experience for a person?
Well, because I have the two kinds, but I also still have the growth as the standard.
I mean, the cat burglar when he first started out smashing windows and cars, but now he's like robbing banks for jewels and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's growth. And it's, I guess.
Right. I mean, it can easily be assumed that these people are educated. They're in a process of education. They're continually moving towards becoming a better thief. But I mean, the idea is that eventually this will catch up. This will seep into other ways of living. They'll always have Dr. Drabkin's Sopranos example, the privacy. They'll have like people listening to them at all times. They'll be worried about what's going on in such a way as to sort of hinder what they're doing at that moment. They could be at a family barbecue, but they're worried about the cop sitting across the street listening in on everything they're saying.
Yeah, I was thinking of the example of Vikings. Back in the old days, you got in your longboat, you went down from Scandinavia, you went up the Seine or something, raping and pillaging. After a while, though, you just become Frenchmen. You settle in, and then, it's baguettes and there may be a period where that's the right thing to do, but then political situations change. And one of the things you didn't talk about in your paper here, but I know you talked about elsewhere, is this conception of democracy. He thinks that in time things settle in, and your life goes better if you can look other people in the eye and listen to them as neighbors instead of like having to stick an axe in their head. It just you grow better. You get better bread out of it.
Is there not a problem here with it being, at least in the optimum retrospective, that the person, having the aesthetic or the everyday experience, everything is based on looking backward, so that the person who is most able to judge whether they've had a good overall everyday life is the 98-year-old woman on her deathbed who's had an absolutely wonderful life and can look back at everything. Because if it's only good if it's best or only good in retrospect, what else? How would the system be able to help her in her normal everyday life up until that point?
Well, the progression will be initially, it'll be retrospective, but the progression assumes that at a certain point, they'll understand the meaning of the everyday. The child trying to learn something doesn't understand practice, why it's important. When they grow, as they continue to grow up, they realize that there's a meaning to practice, and so it's not merely a retrospective thing. They actually, Dewey uses this word, forecasting their own experiences. You can set something up in such a way as to try to attain an aesthetic experience. I mean, we do that in schools all the time. Things don't always work out the way you want them, but on the other hand, we're always trying to set up experiences which we know are going to be meaningful.
Yeah, but the value is in building something that you can look back and feel good about. Building up this wonderful system, and you're putting all of your energy in this one area. You're an architect, and you've got this master building that's going to be the crowning achievement so far of your life, and the day before you put whatever the last thing is in it, a 10.0 earthquake hits and destroys the building. I mean, this is a fallible thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, unless you get to a point where it becomes the aesthetic experience, oh, I did it. I'm wondering how.
You're saying that because of that earthquake that the everydays weren't very meaningful, right?
Or perhaps their meaning has changed, but how do you value them at that point when that's happening and it's all crumbling down?
Well, I mean, that's up to the person. I mean, so I think I've used maybe a certain example before where a person is training really hard to be super strong for like a powerlifting meet or some sort of sports event. And on the way to it, they see this car crashed on the side of the road, and somebody's trapped, and they're thinking, oh, I mean, I'm not going to make it now because I got to deal with this, but they stop, and because they've gained this strength, they're able to just grab the door and rip it clean off and save everybody involved, but they don't make it to their meet or their event. Well, the experience still became meaningful for them because they realized that, whoa, this strength that I did gain was good for something, and although I had this plan in effect, just because things change. I mean, things are always changing. In the example of the architect, he might have a few weeks where he's thinking, God dang it, what happened to my life? But eventually, if he continues growing, he'll see that all his work will pay off if he continues growing.
I just looked at my watch. Unless someone has a burning question that they have to ask right now, let's draw this to a close and then talk afterwards. The answer is...